Hi everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Carrie GK and I'm here today with Joe Gottlieb for another 5 Minutes with Joe. We're still talking about the 2013 Verizon Data Breach Report and discussing some of the more interesting statistics that came out of that research. 621 breaches were dissected, and we're now talking about the threat actors. There's a particular chart in the report that is of interest, particularly because whether you're thinking about it as a small business in a particular industry or you're thinking about it as a nation, it's got some interesting things to contemplate with regards to how threats work, what motivates a particular attack type, and ultimately what they're after. So I'll be putting this up on the screen in a second, and we can talk about it.
Let's take a look at this. This is all about one particular table. It's Table 1, entitled Profiling Threat Actors. It's on page 22 of the report. I just found it to be very, very useful and a good reflection of how the report continues to evolve to build on this data set to then give us ways to think about the data. It's very easy to get taken with one stat or another, but the key is for all the end users, the enterprise organizations out there that are trying to figure out what to do with this information.
Right.
Is how does this pertain to me? How can I look at this data and not let it skew me in a direction that might actually be more pertinent for a company in a different industry or a company of a different size, a company with a different type of asset to protect. So this table really starts to, the axes are, it talks about the industries in question, the region of operation, the common actions that are seen in terms of the types of hacks or malware or incidents that are foisted upon these companies. What are the targeted assets, and also what's the desired data? So just to give a few examples, right? And we also see the threads of organized crime versus state-affiliated versus activist. Activist being a lot lower incidents this year, which kind of makes some sense. That was a bit of a fad. It was a big impact for a short time, probably less than 2 years, maybe a year and a half. So we've seen that really drop off. But organized crime continues to be the powerhouse, generating a lot of money and really dictating a lot of the behaviors. And then state affiliated, as we talked about in the other 5 Minutes with Joe, really driven by a lot of espionage and IP theft, particularly coming from the Chinese origin.
It would be 5 minutes with me, but okay.
5 minutes with me, yeah, thank you. So just a couple examples here. So for example, we see that organized crime tended to focus on finance, retail, and food service, and tended to be very active in Eastern Europe and North America. And it tended to use physical tampering, brute force hacking, also spyware in the malware category, and also targeted, particularly in the finance arena, for example, ATMs, POS controllers, etc. Went after things like payment cards, credentials, bank account information. Those being in the financial or potentially in the retail arena where you could get access to those pieces of information through observance of a transaction, particularly observance in volume of many transactions. And so that is an example of threading your way through this particular chart. And what I encourage people to do is really to look at this chart and find themselves in the story. So find out how they fit, their industry, where they operate, what kind of assets they have, and then from that you can start to think about what aspects of the report are more pertinent to you. How might you rule out a whole trend or two that is reflected in the report but is reflected to identify things that are just not pertinent to you. There's additional information, there's subsequent graphs when you go into the VERIS framework, the 4A framework talking about the incidents and the actors, and as you begin to dissect those, you then start to see this higher level abstraction then descend into actual quantity of breaches that were successfully accomplished via certain variables that were in motion. And you get down into things like server configuration, workstation configuration, people configuration, and that really starts to highlight then the ways that you can start to protect and the ways that you can start to think about the threats and the vulnerabilities that you have present in your space within more of a vertical context as it's being attacked. So I just found this table to be really useful from that standpoint.
And it's always interesting to know when you've got, let's say, shared workstations where multiple employees are on a single system. certain industries have that, right, and others don't. So, whereas some are far more mobile, and I think you start to see some of that dissection happening with the incidents and how they, either were initially generated or how they then grew in through the organization.
Absolutely. Another one is if you're running guest Wi-Fi, what volume of population is running through your guest Wi-Fi network? Is it only business partners that come to visit you on your campus? That's one risk profile, and frankly not particularly large. Or is it you're in hospitality and you've got any of a number of different characters going through that guest Wi-Fi and not necessarily having to pass through a lot of checks, certainly not background checks, certainly not affiliation or context checks,
right,
or maybe not even physical checks to be able to access that infrastructure. Here's just a simple example of then how you might very, very differently examine that part of your infrastructure for vulnerability, for the potential for threats to occur, and to take advantage of vulnerabilities that you may have.
Yep, and I've even been in hotels where I think I'm on their Wi-Fi, and it really is someone else's Wi-Fi, some local Wi-Fi happening, and I think I'm logging into the Hyatt Wi-Fi or whatever. It's an interesting concept. I was sort of surprised not to see a lot of reference to cloud services and the notion of cloud starting to creep into more of the the risk vector, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would agree with you there, and I would just guess, speculation, a few things. Some cloud infrastructure is even more secure than physical traditional infrastructure because it's newer, so more precautions should be taken. We all know there are examples to the contrary whereby people are so excited to grow their business and they use cloud infrastructure and they're not thinking about that. But I think the fact that also cloud infrastructure is being provided by third-party providers that tend to have contracts, that tend to then have some liabilities associated with them, some more than others, that tends to drive some improved protections. I think maybe we also just haven't necessarily seen that category be active in the report. If you notice, this report continues to evolve
right,
as these guys find good patterns, good chunks of data, and they got to make choices about what they
right,
analyze.
Right.
I think we'll see that more and more, even if it's to identify cloud computing as maybe varying in terms of its risk profile. In some circumstances, actually it being quite vulnerable, and others perhaps it being not quite so vulnerable. Maybe that's something we'll see in a future report, but I agree.
Yeah,
I think
absent. Especially when you think about cloud applications where today there are a group of 80 of us or so, and 10 of us might be on Box, and 10 of us are on something else, and I don't know that our the IT organizations are necessarily keeping up with that, and so I think we're going to start seeing more of that creep in,
and we haven't seen the whole consumerization of IT, the bring your own device phenomenon really yet impact that I have seen so far in the report.
Tune in next year.
The characterization, right? Because we know that is very top of mind for CISOs and security teams is how do I wrestle with this BYOD thing? Yes, it's happening. It is a trend for sure, but now it's starting to become one of the less predictable variables in the, trust no one, monitor everything construct, which really has to be the way we go about it.
Right, and so for as you pointed out, find yourself on the chart, but also contemplate what you're doing to look at the things that are touching the assets you're trying to protect, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I would say that's an ongoing theme for us because we have organizations of every size as customers in every industry, but the common theme is that they're diligent about looking at all of the event data surrounding the assets they're trying to protect, right?
That's right.
And just a little infomercial at the end here.
So utilize that data to be more cyber aware. Keep your process iterative, both with your stakeholders and within your own teams, and that continues to drive, I think, the best practice for understanding what's going on and being able to get help where you need it, and being able to evolve your portfolio, which you've necessarily assembled to keep up with this threat horizon. So keep up that good work, and find yourself in this graphic. I think it'll help you to think about the data.
Hopefully never find yourself in the data.
Yeah, not in the breach data, but maybe in these patterns that are showing up in the breach data.
All right, thank you. Thanks again. We'll be back again with another 5 Minutes with Joe very soon.